I almost walked out of that coffee shop 3 times before she finally came through the door. The first time, it was 9:47 on a Saturday morning in October, and the woman at the counter had already refilled my cup twice without me asking. I think she felt sorry for me. I probably looked exactly like what I was, a 32-year-old man sitting alone at a corner table in Kensington Market, wearing the kind of button-up shirt you only iron when you're trying to convince someone you have your life together. My name is Raymond Kowalczyk, technically, but nobody has called me that since my mother signed my report cards. I'm a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Toronto. I renovate old houses on weekends when I need to think, and I apparently agreed to go on a blind date set up by my coworker Priya because I told her, in a moment of exhausted honesty at an office birthday party, that I hadn't been on a date in 14 months, and I was starting to forget what it felt like to have a reason to iron a shirt. Priya said she knew someone. She always knows someone. Her name was Audra. That was all I had. Audra, late 20s, works in early childhood education. Priya's neighbor's cousin or cousin's neighbor. The relationship had gotten garbled by the third time, Priya explained it. We'd texted a handful of times, enough that I knew she had a dry sense of humor and owned too many plants and had strong opinions about which Toronto neighborhoods had the best roadie. She'd suggested the coffee shop. I'd looked it up. Good reviews. Exposed brick. One of those places that serves oat milk without making you feel judged either way. I got there at 9:30 because I'm always early, a habit I inherited from my father and have never been able to shake even when I want to. I ordered a black coffee and a seat near the window. At 9:45, Audra texted. Running a few minutes late, so sorry. At 10:05, nothing. At 10:12, I typed out a reply asking if everything was okay, deleted it, typed it again, sent it. At 10:18, I put my phone face down on the table and stared out at Augusta Avenue and watched a man in a yellow rain jacket walk a very small, very serious-looking dog past the window. That was the second time I almost left. I'd been on enough of these situations, blind dates, app dates, the whole uncomfortable theater of it, to know the particular flavor of embarrassment that comes with being stood up. I was already constructing the story I'd tell Priya on Monday. She seemed nice in her texts. These things happen. No, I'm not upset. I was already halfway out of the chair when my phone buzzed. I'm so sorry. I'm here. I'm outside. Can I explain when I get in? I sat back down, and then the door opened. The first thing I noticed was not Audra. The first thing I noticed was the small boy pressed against her side, his face tucked partially behind her arm, his eyes doing a slow, methodical scan of the room, the way some kids do when they're mapping an unfamiliar space. He looked about 7 or 8. He was wearing a blue rain jacket with a broken zipper, and he was holding a small dinosaur figurine in one fist, a stegosaurus, I think, though I'm not certain, and his grip on it was very tight. Audra spotted me almost immediately. She was tall, dark-haired, a little flushed from rushing. She crossed the room quickly, the boy walking alongside her in that careful, deliberate way, still scanning. She stopped at the table and opened her mouth and then closed it again, like she'd had a speech ready and forgotten it. "Ray," she said, "I am genuinely so sorry. I tried to get my sister to take him and she had a thing, and my usual, it's a hole. I completely understand if this is. Do you want to sit down?" I said. She looked at me. Then she looked at the boy, who had stopped scanning the room and was now looking directly at the dinosaur in his hand. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, okay." She helped him out of his rain jacket. She hung both their coats on the hook near the table. She sat down across from me, and the boy sat next to her, close, their arms touching. "This is my son, Theo," she said. "He's 8. He has autism, and new places take him a little while. He knows we're here for coffee and that we'll leave whenever he wants. That's the deal we made in the car." Theo did not look up. He turned the stegosaurus over in his hands, examining it from all angles. "Hey, Theo," I said. Not loud, not performatively cheerful the way some people get around kids. Just normal. "That's a stegosaurus, right?" He went very still. Then, without looking at me, he held the dinosaur slightly in my direction, not offering it, just presenting it. A small, deliberate gesture that I didn't fully understand, but felt in some instinctive way like a test. "It's a good one," I said. "The plates are the right shape." Theo put the stegosaurus back down on the table in front of him, facing outward. Audra was watching me. I couldn't quite read her expression. "Sorry," she said quietly, and I couldn't tell if she was talking to me or to him. "Don't be," I said, and I meant it. I'm not entirely sure why. I hadn't expected this, hadn't been prepared for it, and some part of me was doing rapid recalculations about what this morning was going to look like. But there was something about the way Audra had said, "That's the deal we made in the car," that had stayed with me. the matter-of-factness of it. No apology tucked inside the explanation, no performance of difficulty. Just, here is how we do things, here is the agreement, here is my kid. The woman at the counter came over. She smiled at Theo with professional warmth and asked if he'd like anything. He didn't answer, but he pointed very precisely at the display case near the register. "The chocolate croissant?" she asked. He pointed again. "One chocolate croissant," she said. Like this was the most normal communication she'd had all morning, and maybe it was. Audra looked at her with something close to relief. "Thank you," she said. "And a latte for me, please? Oat milk if you have it." "We do." "Of course you do." "It's 2026, Audra said, and then she looked at me, and she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that rearranges something slightly in how you see a person. I ordered another coffee. We talked, not the kind of first date talking that feels like a job interview, where you're both reciting your credentials and waiting for the other person to find a deal breaker. We talked the way you talk when the situation has already dismantled the pretense. Audra told me about her work at a developmental center in Scarborough, about the kids she worked with, about how she'd once spent 45 minutes helping a 4-year-old negotiate a peace treaty with an imaginary dragon. She told me she'd grown up in Hamilton, that her parents were both retired teachers, that she made very good pierogies from her grandmother's recipe and mediocre pierogies from every other recipe she'd tried. I told her about the house I was currently renovating on weekends, a 1940s semi-detached in Leslieville, the kind of place where you open a wall and find something unexpected every single time. Last month it had been old newspaper from 1987 stuffed between the studs for insulation. The month before that, a door that opened onto a bricked-up staircase. "Where did the stairs go?" she asked. "Nowhere, now," I said. "That's the thing about old houses. Sometimes they have rooms that used to exist." Theo had eaten most of his croissant. He was still holding the stegosaurus, but his grip had loosened. At one point, without any particular preamble, he looked up at me and said, very clearly, "Stegosaurus had 17 plates." "I didn't know it was that many," I said. "Some had more," he said. "Some had less. It depends." "On what?" He considered this seriously. "On the stegosaurus," he said. "Fair point," I said. He looked back down at the figurine, apparently satisfied. Audra exhaled slowly beside him. She was trying not to smile too widely, I could tell. She had the expression of someone who has learned to celebrate small things without making them feel like a spectacle. We stayed for almost 2 hours, longer than I'd planned. By the end of it, Theo had finished the croissant, reorganized the sugar packets on the table by color, explained to me that the Toronto Blue Jays had a 37% chance of making the playoffs this year, based on current statistics. He seemed personally invested in this, and fallen mostly asleep against Audra's shoulder with the stegosaurus still in his hand. "He doesn't usually do that," Audra said softly. "Talk to people. Not on the first. He usually takes much longer." "Maybe he liked the dinosaur conversation," I said. She looked at Theo, then at me. "Maybe," she said. We paid the bill. Outside it had started to drizzle, that fine, indecisive October rain that can't quite commit to being real. Audra got Theo into his rain jacket, struggling with the broken zipper. "I need to fix that," she said, half to herself. "I have a sewing kit in my car," I said. I have no idea why I said this. I do have a sewing kit in my car. My mother put it there years ago and I've never taken it out, but it was a strange thing to offer. Audra looked up at me. "You have a sewing kit in your car." "My mother's," I said. "I've just never relocated it." She laughed, actually laughed, which was surprising enough that Theo looked up. "I'm going to think about that on the drive home," she said. "Okay, I should get him down for a rest. Today was a lot for him." "Yeah," I said. "I'll text you." I don't know what made me say it with that certainty. I'd gone into that coffee shop that morning, fully prepared to leave after 45 minutes, file the experience away as one of those things, go back to the Leslieville house, and spend the afternoon pulling up subfloor. Instead, I was standing in the rain on Augusta Avenue, watching a woman buckle her 8-year-old into a car seat and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was the specific wanting of a second cup of coffee you've already paid for. I texted her that evening. "Something low pressure, I don't remember exactly," she replied quickly, and then we were just talking again, the same way we had that morning. At some point around 11, I realized I'd been sitting on my kitchen floor for 2 hours because I'd sat down to take off my shoes and hadn't gotten up. We went out again the following weekend. Without Theo, this time. Her parents came down from Hamilton to spend Saturday with him, which Audra said happened regularly, that her mom and dad were very involved, and Theo genuinely loved being with them. She said this without any complicated emotion attached to it, which I found quietly refreshing. A lot of first dates, people perform their family situations. Audra just reported hers like the weather. We went to a Lebanese place on Bloor that she'd been meaning to try. We split 4 dishes. She ordered things I wouldn't have ordered, and I was glad she did. She told me about Theo's father, briefly, without drama, that they'd dated in their mid-20s, that he'd moved to Vancouver when Theo was 2, that he sent birthday cards and called on holidays but wasn't involved. She said it the way you'd describe a leaky faucet that you'd long since stopped being upset about. It was just the situation. She'd built her life around the actual situation, not the one she'd originally planned for. I liked her. I already knew I liked her, but that dinner was the thing that made it feel real rather than just promising. She caught me off guard twice. Once with a joke that went darker than I expected and made me choke on my water, and once when she asked me something about my father that cut right through the standard first date evasions and required me to answer honestly. My father died when I was 26. A stroke, very fast. He was 58 years old and had never once in his life taken a day off work that wasn't mandatory, and I've spent the intervening years doing what his son does, which is working weekends and always being early and keeping a sewing kit in my car that I'll probably never use but can't bring myself to throw away. I told her that. Most of it, anyway. She listened the way some people do, where you can feel that they're actually inside what you're saying, not just waiting for their turn. "Does it get easier?" she asked. "It gets different," I said. "Easier is the wrong word." She nodded. I think maybe she'd known that already and wanted to see how I'd say it. We didn't see each other for 2 weeks after that because I had a project deadline and she had a conference in Ottawa. We texted most days. One night, she sent me a photo of a plant on her windowsill that had finally bloomed after 3 months of nothing, and I sent back, "It just needed to be ready." She sent a single laughing emoji. I stared at my phone for slightly longer than was dignified. The third time I saw her was the one that changed things. She'd asked if I'd want to come over for dinner on a Friday evening. She was making roast chicken, she said, and Theo had been asking about the Stegosaurus conversation and whether the man who knew about the plates was going to come back. She said she was relaying this as information, not as pressure. I told her I'd be there at 7. Her apartment was in a mid-rise building in East York, 3rd floor. Clean, a little lived in, exactly the right number of things everywhere, an enormous number of plants, as advertised. On the low bookshelf in the hallway, there were framed photos. Theo at various ages, her parents at what looked like a cottage somewhere, a group of women I assumed were old friends. Nothing curated, just the actual record of an actual life. Theo was in his room when I arrived. Audra said he knew I was coming and was okay with it, but that he might not come out right away, and that was fine. We'd just have dinner. We had dinner. The roast chicken was very good. We talked the way we'd been talking, easily, with the interruptions and digressions that come from people who've started to relax around each other. She asked about the Leslieville house. I'd found another anomaly, a small pantry that had been wallpapered over and converted into a coat closet sometime in the 60s, with the original shelving still inside. I decided to restore it. "You're giving the house back its original memory," she said. "I hadn't thought of it that way." I said so. "That's what you do with old things," she said. "You figure out what they were trying to be before someone changed it." About 40 minutes into dinner, I heard his door open. Quiet footsteps in the hallway. Then Theo appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, holding a different dinosaur this time, a triceratops. He looked at me with the same careful, methodical assessment he'd given the coffee shop. "You came back," he said. "I did," I said. He considered this. "The triceratops had 3 horns," he said. "The nasal horn is the smallest one. Most people get that wrong in the toys." I looked at the one he was holding. "Does that one get it right?" He examined it seriously. "Mostly," he said. "The frill is too big." "Could be worse," I said. He looked at me for another moment, then walked to the table and sat down in the chair across from me, still holding the triceratops. He didn't ask for food, didn't say anything else for a while. He just sat there. Audra had gone very still in that way she had, that practiced calm she wore like something she'd built deliberately over years. But her eyes were bright. Theo stayed at the table for the rest of the meal. He didn't eat anything, but he stayed. At some point, he put the triceratops down on the table between us, facing outward, the same gesture as the Stegosaurus. I understood it a little better this time. The next few months were not a montage. I want to be honest about that. They were ordinary and sometimes difficult, and the learning curve was real. There were evenings I drove over, and Theo was having a hard day, and we'd all end up watching a nature documentary about cephalopods on the couch, because that was what he needed, and that was what we did. There were evenings Audra was exhausted in the specific way that comes from being the sole functioning adult in a child's life for years and years. And I'd bring takeout from the Thai place on the corner, and we'd eat in near silence because sometimes silence is the right thing. There were weekends she brought Theo to the Leslieville house, and he walked through the rooms doing his assessments, and I showed him where the pantry had been hidden, and he stood inside it for a while, very quiet, running his hands along the original shelves. "Why did they cover it up?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Someone probably thought they were improving things." He was quiet for a moment. "They were wrong," he said. "Yeah," I said. "They were." He nodded, satisfied, and walked back out. There were also harder things. I knew going in, or thought I knew, what it meant to be with someone who had a child. I did not entirely know what it meant to be with someone whose child had the specific needs Theo had, and I want to be clear that what I learned was not that it was harder than I expected. It was more specific than I expected. It required a different kind of attention. Not more attention, just attention directed differently. Predictability mattered. Plans that changed needed to be communicated clearly and early. Loud, unpredictable environments were difficult. Certain textures, certain sounds. I paid attention to these things the way I pay attention to the load-bearing elements of a house. Because if you don't understand the structure, you can't work with it. My own mother met Audra in March at a Sunday lunch at her house in Mississauga. My mother is a woman who communicates primarily through food and strategic questions, and she asked Audra approximately 900 questions over pot roast and was clearly charmed by the end of it. She pulled me into the kitchen afterward, on the pretext of getting more bread. "She's very practical," my mother said, which from her is a significant compliment. "She is," I said. "The little boy," she said. "Theo, what about him?" She straightened a dish towel on the counter that didn't need straightening. "He sounds like he knows what he wants," she said. "That's not a bad thing." "No," I agreed, "it's really not." She patted my arm and handed me the bread, and that was the conversation. Theo met my mother in May. We went to her house in Mississauga on a Sunday. Audra and I were careful about it, talked it through with Theo in advance, drove past the house the week before, so it wasn't entirely new. My mother had made pierogies, not from scratch, from the frozen ones she likes from the Polish deli on Dundas, but she'd made a lot of them. Theo sat at the table and ate 6 pierogies with very great focus. "These have a good texture," he told my mother, which she received with the seriousness it deserved. "I'll tell that to the people who made them," she said. "You didn't make them?" Theo said. "No," she said, with complete honesty. "The ones I make aren't as good. I learned that eventually." Theo thought about this. "That's okay," he said. "Knowing what you're bad at is useful." My mother looked at me across the table. I looked at my coffee. There was one moment. I want to tell you about one particular moment, because I think about it still. It was June, a weeknight. I'd come over after work, still in my work clothes, and Audra had been dealing with something difficult at the center. A child who was struggling, a family situation she couldn't fix, the accumulated weight of a job that asks you to care constantly. She was quiet when I got there, not unhappy exactly, just low, the kind of tired that doesn't get fixed by sleep. Theo was at the kitchen table doing homework, math, which he found tedious but manageable. He worked through it methodically, with the same focused energy he gave to Dinosaur taxonomy. I changed out of my work clothes and made tea, and Audra sat at the table across from Theo with her tea, and I sat beside her. Nobody talked much. Theo finished his math. He put his pencil down and looked at his mother. Then, without any explanation or preamble, he got up from his chair, walked around the table, and stood next to her. He put his hand on her shoulder. Just his hand, resting there. He stood like that for maybe 30 seconds. Then he said, "You seem sad." Audra looked at him. "A little bit," she said. "I'm okay." He nodded. "Okay," he said, and walked back to his chair and picked up his pencil and began packing up his homework. I sat there with my tea going warm in my hands and thought about how long it had probably taken him to learn to do that, to read her, to know when to cross the room. Audra caught me looking. "He's been doing that more," she said softly. "Noticing ya," I said. She picked up her tea. "He noticed you," she said, "the first day, in the coffee shop. He almost never does that." I didn't say anything. Sometimes you know not to talk. I asked Audra's father for a conversation. Not permission exactly, because she's a 31-year-old adult, and that's not how it works, but I wanted to speak with him before I did anything. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning in Hamilton while Audra was at a workshop. Her father, Gordon Renault, retired high school teacher, very tall, the kind of man who wears the same fleece vest in all seasons, shook my hand and ordered a black coffee and looked at me directly for most of the conversation in a way that I respected even when it was slightly uncomfortable. You know what you're taking on, he said. It wasn't a question. I know more than I did 6 months ago, I said. I think that's probably honest. He looked at me for a moment. Audra doesn't need someone who'll try, he said. She's had people who'll try. She needs someone who'll stay when trying is hard. I understand, I said. Theo will take longer, he said. Whatever you're building with Audra, with Theo it's slower. You have to be okay with slow. I'm a structural engineer, I said. I work on old houses on weekends. I'm used to slow. Gordon looked at me for another second. Then he picked up his coffee. Good, he said. That was the conversation. I proposed in August. We were at the Leslieville house. The renovation was mostly done by then. The pantry restored to its original form. The bricked-up staircase I'd discovered turned into a proper reading nook at the landing. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Audra was sitting on the front porch steps with a coffee, watching the street, and I came and sat next to her, and I told her, I want to keep showing up. I want to be the person in the car seat. I want to figure out which things are load-bearing and which ones aren't. I want to make a deal with Theo about whatever he needs and keep it. I know this isn't the regular version of this. I don't want the regular version. I want this one. She looked at the ring for a long moment. You told my dad, she said. Not a question. I had coffee with him in Hamilton. He didn't tell me. I asked him not to. She looked at me. He kept a secret from my mother for 3 weeks? I think he did, yeah? She laughed. That alone is impressive, she said. Then she said yes. We told Theo that evening, at the kitchen table, because we'd talked about how to do it, and this was the plan. We told him straight, clearly, what was going to happen. Ray is going to live with us. We're going to be a family. Here's what changes, and here's what stays the same. He listened with the same careful attention he brought to everything. When we finished, he was quiet for a moment. He looked at me. Will you come to the Leslieville house still? He said. Yes, I said. You can come too, whenever you want. He thought about this. There are more rooms to look at, he said. There are, I said. I found another one last week, actually. He sat up slightly. What kind? A small one under the stairs, I said. I think it used to be a cold cellar. I need to figure out what it was originally. He looked at me very seriously. We should go look, he said. Yeah, I said, we should. He picked up his triceratops from where it sat at the edge of the table, turned it over once, set it back down, facing outward. I've thought a lot about what I nearly didn't have. The 3 times I almost left that coffee shop. The way I'd been sitting there reconstructing my exit speech, telling myself this was a perfectly normal outcome, these things happen. No, I'm not upset. If I'd left before she walked in, I would have gotten back in my car and driven to Leslieville and pulled up subfloor and told Priya on Monday that it just hadn't worked out. I would have been fine. I know how to be fine. But Audra walked in with Theo and his stegosaurus, and he held it toward me in that careful, serious way, and I said the plates were the right shape, and something shifted. You can't always know which moments are going to be the ones you carry. You can't tell, standing in a coffee shop on a rainy Saturday in October, which cup of coffee is going to change the whole shape of the years ahead. You're just there, deciding whether to stay or go, and sometimes staying is the thing. My father was 58 when he died. He spent his whole life arriving early, and I've never been able to stop doing it. I used to think that was just habit, something I inherited without meaning to. But I've started to think it's also this. You show up before you know what you're walking into. You don't wait until it's certain. You get there early and you hold your coffee, and you wait to see what comes through the door. Whatever it is, you stay.